Ironboy Jr., they called him. The weakest of the three, they said. The worst. This Spider-Man has been the punching bag of the Spider-Man community for a long time. Unfortunately, I'm not innocent. I hated how much he relied on Tony Stark. I hated how carefree he was with his secret identity. And I hated his lack of character. But after watching No Way Home, things changed. I started to realize something. That for better or worse, all those things that happened could have led to us getting one of the greatest live-action Spider-Man of all time. One thing I struggled to accept is that this is an adaptation of the character. Yes, Spider-Man is my favorite character of all time, and I'd love to see him ripped directly from the page and dropped onto the screen. But that's not how things work. How could we get angry at Tom for not sticking to the source material when the other two took liberties as well? Toby dated MJ before even being aware of Gwen Stacy's existence. Sandman was the reason for Uncle Ben's death, and this version of Doc Ock revolutionized the character, inspiring later adaptations to give Otto and Peter a more personal connection. With Andrew, he was destined to be Spider-Man. His powers weren't just random, it had to do with his DNA. His parents were heavily involved in his story. Gwen died to Harry Osborn instead of Norman Osborn, and he later tells us that he stopped pulling his punches, which to me implies that he may have taken life. I say all this to say that the Spider-Man we see on the screen isn't the same one we see on the pages. Comic accuracy isn't the end-all be-all. As long as the character keeps the same fundamentals and isn't just completely different, it should be fine. When we're first introduced to Tom in Civil War, he's everything you'd expect. Smart, quippy, and strong enough to casually overpower the Winter Soldier. He's not the center of attention. It makes you want to see more of him. There were no clear flaws with his debut, but in Spider-Man Homecoming, the cracks started to show. We got more insight into his appearance in Civil War, and he just seemed very excited to be there. Very fanboyish, which I wasn't a fan of. Get it? The Vulture was wronged by Tony Stark, and that was his motive throughout the movie. Something else I didn't love, but this isn't anything new. We look at Spectacular Spider-Man, it was Norman Osborn basically taking that place or that role of Tony Stark. So the Vulture specifically being out for vengeance against someone else or having hatred for another person, and Spider-Man kind of wiggling his way in there isn't something new, and it isn't something we haven't seen before. But aside from that, the movie was solid, and Tom's progression as a character was very apparent. He was the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, still very early into his career and still hadn't been pushed to his limit. Throughout the movie, there was always someone or something there to help him, whether it was Tony, Karen, Happy, or Ned. But slowly, that all started to get ripped away. Tony taking his suit away, and by extension Karen, Happy being too busy to pay him any real attention, and Ned being limited to his position as just a guy in the chair. When all was said and done, it was up to Peter to stop the Vulture. No one was there to save him this time, and no one else took him as seriously as Peter did. And quite frankly, no one cared enough to stop the Vulture as much as Peter did. He knows the threats of the city more than Iron Man, more than Tony Stark, because Tony is more interested in saving the world, as we've seen in Age of Ultron. No one was there to save him this time. He would have died under the rubble if he didn't use his willpower to push past his limits. If you're nothing without the suit, you shouldn't have it. These words rang in Peter's head non-stop, but by the end of the movie, he proved that he's more than just that. He doesn't need the most advanced tech in the world to do what's right. I personally believe that seeing Peter create his own costume with a sewing machine like we saw at the end of No Way Home would have been a perfect ending to this movie, especially after seeing him turn down the Iron Spider and the invitation to be an Avenger. But instead, the entire message of the movie is rendered kinda useless, since Tony ends up giving him the suit back. Not only that, but in the next film he appears in, he also receives the Iron Spider, which he previously turned down. And on top of that, he also refers to himself as an Avenger throughout the movie. At first glance, this just seems like character regression, but taking his age into account, he's bound to be a very flawed character, to repeat mistakes until he receives lasting consequences. Sure, he nearly died in Homecoming, but everything turned out fine. It's not like anyone he cared about got hurt, right? Peter's biggest flaw in these movies is his selfishness. Let me explain. In Far From Home, Nick Fury tries to reach out to Peter multiple times, but Peter is dead set on ditching all of his responsibilities as Spider-Man for the sake of a field trip. When Fury does finally reach him and explains that the world is possibly in danger, Peter still disregards it, asking if they can just find someone else to help. Even after receiving Tony's dying gift, the glasses, he ultimately gives that responsibility to someone else. someone else he hardly even knows. Peter made a couple of really bad decisions with these glasses, and he knows how dangerous they are. Yet he still gives that power to someone he can't even fully trust. Even if Peter doesn't want this power in his hands, he should know that it's still safer with him than anyone else at the moment. But he attempts to rid himself of that responsibility by pushing it onto someone else. And we all know how terribly that went. Not only did Peter's actions lead to the mass destruction of the city, many possible casualties and injuries, but also the loss of his secret identity, which in turn endangered everyone near and dear to him. That's where the movie ends, with the consequences of his actions. No Way Home picks up at that exact moment, and we see Peter continuing to deal with the repercussions. It is unfortunately interrupted by a joke that went on a little too long with May and Happy, but right afterwards we got a scene of JJJ being the pro hater we all knew he would be. Later in the movie, the villains are introduced. Due to a direct action of Tom, by the way, Tom is basically faced with the decision to either save them or let them die. Learning from his previous mistakes of basically standing around and doing nothing, he actually tries his hardest to help these people. But of course, they betray him. They are villains after all. I would say another flaw is that he's too trusting, letting all of these seemingly reformed villains into the same room as his Aunt May. And although I don't like the fact that he does that, I wouldn't necessarily call this bad writing. It's just consistent with the character. He even revealed his identity to Star-Lord, who was literally holding a gun to his head. But he'll be sure to form trust issues soon enough, don't worry. Then, as another direct cause of his actions, May is killed. Peter is the one that opted to save these villains rather than send them back immediately, and is also the one who trusted them enough to willingly bring them into his home. All of this is his fault. His first major loss. His Aunt May died because of his actions. Immediately, there's a shift in his character. All of the lighthearted jokes and comments flew out of the window. He now understood how serious the situation was and that it was up to him to stop it. Toby and Andrew also bestowed their knowledge onto him, which we could only assume will help him avoid their mistakes in the future. Even after defeating the Goblin, he still lost everything because he made the hardest decision of his life, making everyone forget Peter Parker. And that brings us to where we are now. No money, no friends, no aunt, no Stark Tech, nothing. Not even Square One, below it. He has less now than he has ever had. After wiping any memory of him from existence, does he turn around and try to undo it? No, not just for himself, but for their safety. He has now experienced the ins and outs of his life as Spider-Man, and he witnessed firsthand what the risk of being close to Spider-Man can be. Before the spell took effect, Peter had one last talk with Ned and MJ. There, he promised he'd get them to remember who he is, and it'll be like none of this ever happened. When presented with the chance to do so, seeing MJ face to face again, he doesn't. As badly as he wants to, and as badly as it hurts, he chooses to remain forgotten and live with the consequences of his actions. To stand in front of May's grave and have Happy believe he was nothing more than a friend of hers. That's the cost of being Spider-Man. That's the risk that comes with the job every time you put on the mask. Tom's journey is one of trial and error, of learning the hard way, and now he knows the impact behind his actions are much bigger than he originally thought. Yet he still pushes forward, still continues to be Spider-Man, and that's why I believe Tom has the potential to become one of the greatest Spider-Men we've ever seen.